Somebody help me! Nurse! Nurse! It's an emergency! I've all these bumps on my face and I don't know what to do! I don't know what it can be! I must have chickenpox! Or smallpox! Oh no! I'm going to die! Nurse! Pay attention to me!
Little boy, the nurse is really busy, and those are probably just pimples. You look like you're at your emotional pubescent stage anyway. Also, smallpox is one of only 2 diseases in the world to be completely eradicated, so there's no way you could have it.
Oh, oops! I don't really know anything about it, actually. I never pay attention in my science classes.
Well, then it's time to teach you. Let's take an adventure to Smallpox Land.
Oh boy! Smallpox land? I can't wait!
Well, then brace yourself. Whee!
Wait! Where are we?
We're inside the human body. In order to understand the etiology of smallpox, we have to start at the cellular level. Smallpox is caused by the variola virus, a virus that emerged in humans thousands of years ago. There are 2 variants of the smallpox virus, variola major and variola minor. Variola major is the most severe and common form of the virus, with a higher fever and more serious rash. Variola minor is less common and much less severe, with a mortality rate of less than 1% compared to around 30% in variola major. This is a 3D visualization of the cellular mechanisms and life cycle of the smallpox virus taken from National Geographic. The smallpox virus assembles itself using its own viral proteins in the cell cytoplasm without the aid of host cell mechanisms. The virus multiplies in large quantities within the cell and uses the structural proteins that give the cell its shape to move around within the cytoplasm, such as microtubules, as shown here. Assembly also requires the cytoskeleton in order to occur, specifically actin-binding proteins. Another cytoskeletal protein, called actin, forms actin comet tails, which shoot mature viruses through the cytoplasm to the cell surface, and possibly into adjacent cells, at extremely high speeds of up to 3 micrometers per minute. Overall, replication of the variola virus is pretty fast, at around 12 hours. Transmission is usually airborne, from droplets of mucus from an infected patient. It's typically transmitted through considerable face-to-face interaction with someone infected, but can also be spread by contact with infected bodily fluids or by contaminated objects. It can be transmitted throughout the course of illness, but most frequently during the first week of the rash.
Gee, that sounds scary. But what does it actually do to you?
Good question. Symptoms usually start with an incubation period of 7 to 17 days, which has no symptoms and is usually not contagious. The prodrome, or initial symptom stage, lasts 2 to 4 days and is sometimes contagious, with a high fever, head and body aches, malaise, and vomiting. The stage which produces the early rash lasts around 4 days and is the most contagious. Small red spots usually develop on the mouth and tongue, which eventually develop into sores that break open and release large quantities of virus that infect the mouth and throat. The rash appears and spreads over the entire body within 24 hours. Upon formation of the smallpox rash, the fever typically fades, but by day 3 the rash turns into raised bumps, and on day 4 the bumps will fill with a dark, opaque fluid with a depression in the middle that resembles a belly button. The fever will rise again and often persist until scab formation occurs. In the next 5 days, a pustular rash will occur, where the bumps will turn into sharply raised, round, and hard pustules that feel like there's a bead under the surface of the skin. Pustules and scabs will then form for the next 5 days, when the pustules begin to dry out. By the end of the second week after the rash appears, most of the pustules will have scabbed over. With time, the smallpox scabs begin to resolve. This lasts around 6 days and is still contagious. The scabs will begin to fall off, leaving pitted scars, and most scabs will fall off around 3 weeks after the first appearance of the rash. The person will remain contagious until all of their scabs have fallen off. The following is a timeline of the 2 major physical manifestations of smallpox. an elevated fever, and the eruption of pustules on the skin. As you can see, the fever spikes before the onset of rash and remains elevated until scab formation, which usually occurs around 10 to 14 days after the onset of the rash. There are different variations of smallpox. In modified smallpox, usually contracted by vaccinated patients, there's usually no fever during the rash stage, and skin lesions are fewer, more superficial, and less uniform, leaving shallower scars. In malignant smallpox, skin lesions remain flat on the skin and are accompanied by a more severe pre-eruption stage. The rash in the mouth and tongue is more extensive than with ordinary smallpox. The pustules contain almost no fluid, and some contain hemorrhages. This type of smallpox is almost always fatal.
Oh my gosh! This man looks awful! What's wrong with him?
He has the most severe form of smallpox, called hemorrhagic or black pox. It's accompanied by extensive bleeding into the skin, mucous membranes, and GI tract. It forms in around 2% of infections and mostly in adults. The skin doesn't blister but remains smooth. Bleeding occurs under the skin, making it look charred and black, hence the name black pox.
Oh, that sounds horrible. I'm so frightened. Isn't there anything you can do to stop it?
Calm down. I already told you, smallpox is one of 2 diseases that has been completely eradicated in the world. I can show you how people have tried to prevent themselves from getting smallpox over time. But to do that, we're going to have to go way back in history. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. Let's go!
The earliest method of prevention of smallpox was called inoculation, also known as variolation. Inoculation involved inhaling powdered smallpox scabs or scratching material from a smallpox lesion onto the skin. This would create a mild reaction to the smallpox virus, followed by lifelong immunity. Accounts of smallpox inoculation in China can be found as early as the late 10th century, and the procedure was practiced widely by the 16th century during the Ming Dynasty. Over the next 7 centuries, countries around the world, at first wary of inoculation treatments, gradually lost their skepticism and began to adopt inoculation as an effective prevention of smallpox epidemics. Finally, in 1796, the first preventative vaccination for smallpox was invented.
Oh my gosh! Who is that man in the blue snuggie? And where did he come from?
Relax. I'm Edward Jenner, and I invented the very first smallpox vaccination. I'm a doctor who grew up in Berkeley, Gloucestershire. Well, actually, I was a doctor because I'm dead now. And I discovered that immunity to smallpox could be produced by inoculating a person with material from a cowpox lesion. This was a lot safer than inoculation, and didn't involve a risk of getting smallpox. This was soon practiced all over the world. Nowadays, we don't vaccinate people with cowpox virus anymore. We use a virus called the vaccinia virus, a change that came about during the 19th century. Vaccinia is in the same family as cowpox and variola, but is genetically distinct from both. That's all from me. Stay healthy, my friends.
In the 20th century, a global campaign to eradicate smallpox had begun, and by 1977, the last case of smallpox worldwide in Somalia was tracked down, isolated, and cured by World Health Organization physicians. Eradicating smallpox is considered to be one of the greatest feats of 20th century medicine.
Gee whiz, that's amazing! There must have been a lot of fear and negative stigma associated with smallpox, though.
There really was a lot of stigma. Smallpox epidemics provoked great panic and fear amongst members of the ruling class, doctors, and society in general, especially since smallpox was recognized as not being a poor person's disease. Even a few cases were enough to create civil unrest and cause widespread announcements of epidemic emergencies. Some hospitals even refused to treat smallpox patients, and only a few were left open to treat those afflicted with the disease in many Western nations. In certain Eastern cultures, uninfected royalty was often stigmatized against. The line of succession would be changed to favor a younger son who had already contracted smallpox over the next in line, in order to ensure that the ruler would not die of the disease and prematurely end his reign.
I hope you learned a lot about smallpox today. For more insight on stigma and smallpox, you can watch the short clip Valerie has from 1905. It is completely optional and up to the class, and therefore my presentation is not over 10 minutes. Bye!